I never thought a manila envelope could feel so heavy until my sister-in-law Jessica thrust it into my hands at Sunday family dinner, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming as she announced to the entire table, "Surprise! I got these printed up as a joke since you two are always bickering. Maybe you should make it official." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter while I stared at the realistic-looking divorce papers bearing my name and my husband David's signature, forged but convincing enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. I set the envelope down calmly, looked Jessica in the eye, and said, "That's quite the sense of humor you have there. I'll have to remember that." What she didn't know was that my 10 years as a private investigator had taught me to recognize deception in all its forms, and I'd been watching her marriage to David's brother, Mark, unravel for months. The photos on my phone were about to turn her little prank into a very serious conversation. Looking back, I should have known Jessica was planning something when she insisted on hosting dinner at her pristine suburban home instead of our usual rotation. In the 3 years since she'd married into the family, Jessica had made it clear that she considered herself the matriarch of our generation, despite being the newest addition. She had opinions about everything from our vacation choices to our decision to wait on having children, and she never hesitated to share them with anyone who would listen. The warning signs had been there all evening. She greeted David with an elaborate hug while barely acknowledging me. She'd seated herself at the head of the table, relegating me to the far end next to their youngest nephew, who spent the entire meal flicking peas at his sister. Most telling of all, she'd invited her mother Patricia, who never missed an opportunity to comment on how unstable modern marriages were becoming. You know, Patricia had said over the appetizers, eyeing David and me with poorly concealed disapproval. In my day, couples worked through their problems instead of running to lawyers every time they disagreed. I'd smile politely, accustomed to these veiled accusations. David had reached for my hand under the table, a gesture Jessica noticed with obvious irritation. The family dynamic had always been complicated. David's parents had divorced when he was young, leaving him and Mark to navigate holidays between households. When Mark married Jessica, she appointed herself the keeper of family traditions, seemingly determined to create the perfect family unit she felt had been missing. The dinner conversation had been typical. Mark discussing his promotion at the insurance company, Jessica detailing her latest home renovation project, and David sharing updates about his accounting firm's busy season. I contributed when asked, mentioning a few recent cases I'd closed, but Jessica had a way of steering conversations away from my work. She'd never quite approved of what she called my unconventional career choice. "I just don't understand why anyone would want to spy on people for a living," she'd said more than once. "It seems so invasive." What Jessica didn't understand was that being a private investigator required more than just surveillance. It demanded psychological insight, attention to detail, and the ability to read people's true intentions beneath their carefully constructed facades, skills I've been honing since college, when I started with a criminal justice degree and worked my way up through insurance fraud investigations to running my own practice specializing in matrimonial cases. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Jessica criticized my profession, I'd been inadvertently gathering intelligence on her own marriage for months. It had started innocuously, noticeable changes in her wardrobe, how she suddenly became protective of her phone, the frequent girls' nights out that Mark mentioned with increasing frustration. Then there were the social media posts from locations she hadn't mentioned visiting and the unexplained charges on credit card statements she'd left on her kitchen counter during family gatherings. As a professional, I recognized the patterns immediately. As a family member, I hoped I was wrong. The fake divorce papers had been Jessica's masterstroke, her way of publicly humiliating me while positioning herself as the family comedian. She clearly spent time and money making them look authentic. The legal letterhead, the official-sounding language, even what appeared to be David's signature. The performance had been flawless too, complete with mock concern about our marriage's rocky patches and suggestions that we might need professional help. "I mean, everyone can see the tension between you two," Jessica had continued, basking in the attention from David's parents and siblings. "Maybe this will force you to either work things out or stop pretending everything's fine." David had gone pale, staring at the papers with genuine shock. "Jessica, this isn't funny. You can't just..." "Oh, relax," she'd waved him off dismissively. "It's not like they're real. Though honestly, maybe they should be. You two argue more than any couple I know." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be believable. David and I did disagree sometimes about work schedules, social obligations, his family's tendency to overstep boundaries. Normal couple disagreements that Jessica had apparently been cataloging and weaponizing. But what Jessica failed to realize was that my unconventional career had given me access to information she definitely didn't want made public. 3 weeks earlier, while working a routine insurance fraud case at the Marriott downtown, I'd photographed her in the hotel bar with a man who definitely wasn't Mark. She'd been dressed in a red dress I'd never seen before, sitting close enough to share drinks, their body language suggesting an intimacy that went far beyond friendship. I'd almost convinced myself it was innocent, until I saw them again the following Tuesday at a restaurant across town. This time, the man's hand was on her thigh under the table, and Jessica was wearing the diamond tennis bracelet she told Mark was a gift from her sister. The sister who lived in Portland and hadn't visited in over a year. The third sighting had been the most damning. 2 Saturdays ago, while Mark was at his nephew's baseball game, an event Jessica claimed she was too busy to attend, I'd photographed her and the same man entering a residence in an upscale neighborhood. They'd stay for 3 hours, emerging with the rumpled appearance and satisfied expressions of people who hadn't been discussing business. Each photograph was time-stamped and geotagged, a habit from my professional work that had become second nature. I'd initially planned to delete them, unwilling to insert myself into family drama that wasn't my business. But Jessica's stunt tonight had changed my perspective entirely. "You know what, Jessica?" I said, standing up and gathering the fake divorce papers. "This has given me a great idea for my own little surprise." Her smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing something in my tone that suggested her joke hadn't landed quite the way she'd intended. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, looking confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Well," I continued, pulling out my phone, "since we're sharing unexpected documents tonight, I thought you might be interested in some photographs I've taken recently. Professional work, you understand." Jessica's face went pale. "What photographs?" "Oh, just some surveillance shots from a few cases I've been working on. Nothing too dramatic." I swiped through my phone deliberately, letting her see glimpses of the screen without revealing the contents. Though I have to say, some people really don't realize how often they're being watched. Take this hotel bar downtown, for instance. The silence at the table was deafening. Jessica's mother, Patricia, was still clutching her wine glass, confused by the sudden tension. Mark was looking between his wife and me with growing alarm. David had set down his fork, recognizing my professional demeanor. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Jessica said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm not implying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm simply saying that people should be more careful about their public behavior, especially when they're married to someone as trusting as Mark." Mark's chair scraped against the floor as he turned to face his wife. "Jessica, what is she talking about?" "Nothing. She's just being dramatic because she can't take a joke." But Jessica's hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. "You know how she gets when someone challenges her precious marriage." "Actually," I said, opening the first photograph on my phone, "I think Mark deserves to see what his wife has been doing during her girls' nights out." The image was clear and unambiguous. Jessica in her red dress, leaning across the table to kiss a man who definitely wasn't her husband. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the same night she told Mark she was having dinner with college friends. Mark's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally, devastating comprehension. "Who was that man, Jessica?" "I can answer that," I said, swiping to the next photo. "His name is Richard Brennan. He's a real estate developer who's been married for 15 years. I ran a background check after the second time I saw them together." "You ran a background check?" Patricia gasped, finally understanding that this wasn't about David and me anymore. "It's what I do," I explained patiently. "And when I see someone I care about being deceived, I tend to gather information. Would you like to see the photos from the hotel entrance? Or perhaps the ones from the house on Maple Street?" Jessica lunged for my phone, but I'd been expecting that reaction. Years of dealing with confronted cheaters had taught me to keep evidence secure. "You can't just spy on people," she screamed, abandoning any pretense of innocence. "That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," I replied calmly. "Public places, public behavior. No expectation of privacy. I learned that in my first year on the job." Mark was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. How long, Jessica? How long has this been going on? Mark, please let me explain. How long? His voice was barely controlled fury. Jessica's perfectly constructed facade crumbled completely. 6 months, she whispered. But it doesn't mean anything. He's just 6 months. Mark's repetition was flat, emotionless. 6 months of lies. 6 months of girls' nights and mysterious errands and new clothes I couldn't afford to buy you. It's not what you think. I think, Mark said, standing up slowly, that I need to see those photos. All of them. I looked at Jessica, giving her one last chance to salvage something from the wreckage she created. But she was staring at the fake divorce papers she thought were so clever, perhaps realizing that she just orchestrated the destruction of her own marriage. I'm sorry, Mark, I said, handing him my phone. I never wanted you to find out this way. The next hour passed in a blur of accusations, tears, and the slow dismantling of a relationship that had appeared solid from the outside. Jessica alternated between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for ruining everything with my obsessive surveillance. Mark sat in stunned silence, scrolling through photograph after photograph of his wife's betrayal. The bracelet, he said finally, the one you said your sister gave you. Jessica's sob was confirmation enough. And the conference in Chicago last month? Another sob. The money missing from our savings account? I was going to pay it back, she whispered. David had moved to sit beside his brother, offering quiet support while their parents tried to process what they'd witnessed. Patricia kept muttering about family dignity and private matters, clearly struggling to reconcile her daughter-in-law's public humiliation with her own sense of propriety. I think, I said quietly, that David and I should go home now. But Mark shook his head. No, you've been honest with me when no one else would, when my own wife wouldn't. He looked at Jessica with something approaching disgust. Did you really think this was funny, making a joke about divorce while you were actively destroying our marriage? Jessica had no answer for that. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers Mark filed were very real and very thorough. He'd hired an attorney who specialized in matrimonial cases, who incidentally, someone I'd worked with frequently in my investigations. The evidence I gathered proved invaluable in establishing the timeline of Jessica's affair and her financial deceptions. The family dinners stopped, replaced by awkward phone calls and careful coordination to avoid putting David's parents in impossible positions. Jessica moved out of the house she'd spent so much money renovating, taking only her personal belongings and the debt she'd accumulated maintaining her double life. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who'd mocked my marriage with fake divorce papers was now facing real ones, while David and I had emerged stronger than ever. Her cruel joke had backfired spectacularly, revealing not our relationship's weaknesses but her own character flaws. Richard Brennan, the married real estate developer, had disappeared from Jessica's life the moment his own wife discovered the affair. Faced with his own potential divorce and the exposure of his business practices, he'd chosen to preserve his established life rather than pursue the new relationship. Mark had handled the entire situation with a dignity that surprised everyone, including himself. He refused to engage in vindictive behavior, instead focusing on rebuilding his life and protecting his financial interests. The house sold quickly, and he moved into a downtown condo that better suited his new single lifestyle. I should thank you, he told me at David's birthday dinner last month. If you hadn't been paying attention, I might have wasted years wondering why my marriage was falling apart. I just wish I'd said something sooner, I replied. Would you have believed it if someone had told you 6 months ago that Jessica was cheating? He had a point. Sometimes the truth has to reveal itself in its own time, even when the evidence is hiding in plain sight. Jessica's final text to me arrived 3 days after the divorce was finalized. I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life over a stupid joke. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. You destroyed your own life, Jessica. I just documented it. Now, 6 months later, David and I were planning our own renovations to the house we bought together. A house we could afford because we'd built our relationship on honesty rather than deception. The fake divorce papers Jessica thought were so clever were now framed in my office. A reminder that sometimes the biggest jokes are the ones people play on themselves. And every time a new client comes to me suspecting their spouse of infidelity, I think about Jessica's perfectly manicured nails and her confident smile as she handed me those papers. I remember how certain she was that she was in control of the situation, how convinced she was that her secrets were safe. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. My job is just to help it along.